This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for our ICG webinar programme. So for today's webinar, we're delighted to welcome back ICG member Tom Woodnett. Tom is founder of the strategic insight consultancy Feeling Mutual. He specialises in online qualitative research. Tom wants to promote the responsible use of AI tools to enhance, not replace, the role of qualitative researcher. Today, he'll be sharing the results from a survey insight platform sponsored by qual from earlier in the year on the topic. The aim is to promote discussion about what we've all experienced and what excites or worries us about this rapidly changing innovation so we can all get the most out of it. Tom is happy to take questions at the end. So if you'd like to ask something, please type your questions in the chat box as we go through, and I'll read them out for you after he's finished his presentation. Or at the end, you can turn on your webcam, raise your hand, and ask him your question yourself. So this webinar is generously sponsored by qual. The platform supports all your asynchronous project needs, including diary tasks, UX research, video blogging, international projects, long-term communities, much more. Click the QR code or follow the link to claim your exclusive ICG discount. qual are passionate about quality insight and love working with quality researchers. They look forward to making friends with more ICG members and helping you deliver more for your clients. Before I hand over to Tom, here are some more events we have planned for you over the summer. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events. And contact Lucy if you'd like to know any more. So now I'll hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Sally. I will share my slides in just a second.
Here you go.
Right, here we go. Share. Right. Now, hopefully,
that looks good.
Going to full screen. How's that look?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. So, yeah, thanks very much for the intro. And this is about 20 minutes, the slides I've got, and we thought it's probably best just to, if anything occurs to you, it could be an observation, it could be a question, anything at all, just whack it in the chat to everyone. And then at the end, we'll have time to go through everything rather than stopping as we go, because I think, we could talk forever about this stuff. So that's probably the best way to make the most of the time. And yeah, as Sally said, this is a presentation that was done back in March this year, when things were relatively fresh. So it's amazing how quickly everything's moved on. So what we've got here is some data from 167 qual researchers around the world, talking about their expectations of the impact of AI, how they feel about it. We did a big online qual discussion with qual. We did a survey as well with 167 people, and then we had a big workshop, and I'm sure many of you or some of you have recognized names who are actually part of that as well. So thanks for your contributions there. And really the aim behind this is really to be looking forward, to be thinking about the risks as well as the opportunities, so that we can hopefully shape the direction this moves in and benefit from it. So I will crack on with this 20-minute presentation, and we'll get to those discussions later. And yeah, do add comments or questions or discussion points into the chat, and we'll go through that. So this slide said a wave of AI is coming. I think it's very much arrived. It's impossible not to see headlines about it, to hear conversations about it, to see LinkedIn posts about it, and you can just see how quickly it's risen compared to other huge innovations. In 5 days, ChatGPT had reached the scale that Instagram took 75 days to reach, and Spotify 150 days, and that's without any cats or pop stars, which is something of an achievement. So as this AI image showed, when I just typed in confused surfer, we need to work out how to ride this wave. And I'm sure we're all going through a range of emotions, from excitement to the opportunities, denial that it could ever be as good as humans and replace us, to fear that what we're going to do in 5, 10 years, or even 2 years. How are we going to charge a premium to clients and justify that in a world where much of what we do might be automatable, if that's even a word. So we need to work out how to ride this wave, and that's a big part of what I'm trying to do here, to talk about it with everyone, to share experiences as well. We can come to that at the end as well. And also to manage expectations, because there's going to be lots of conversations we're having with clients in the future, and now saying, well, why can't you do this cheaper with AI? Why do I need you to do the analysis? Why do I need you to design the study? So we need to be able to I think in some ways it's about being better at doing PR. One of the things that psychologist Thomas Chamorro-Premusic, who's a real expert in psychology of work, and he says, one of the things that we do better than AI is curiosity, which I think is central to what we do. But another thing we do better than AI is humility. But actually, I think our humility, I think qual researchers is usually quite a modest bunch. That's not going to serve us. I think we need to make sure clients know how we do things better than AI, because they might see questions we ask and not realize all the thought and craft that went into those questions. They might think that we're just reporting what people said, but obviously in doing that, we're interpreting it a lot. We're ignoring some of the things people said. We're thinking about strategy. We're thinking about all these different things, culture, all these different elements. We need to PR what we do better to show our value as well. So ultimately, we need to manage expectations better in this future. So moving on to, is it all hype? I mean, if you've seen any of the examples of what it can do, it's increasingly feeling less like hype and more like a really significant revolution. It's been called the next revolution. It doesn't really get more grandiose than that, but a lot of people are putting their necks on the line, seeing how significant this is. This image is actually from deep dream generator, where they just typed out this request for an image and suddenly it spat that out, which is quite an evocative image, I'm sure you'll agree. Then you look a bit closer, and AI, for some reason, with visuals, messes up people's faces, messes up the hands. And there is this fact that AI can have what they call hallucinations. It can get things wrong. And there is a real danger, I think, if we just assume it's right, because it can be so convincing. If we just assume it's right, then we're going to end up in a bad position, because, we're the ones that take responsibility. We can't blame the algorithm and say, "Oh, go and speak to OpenAI about the mistake that we made in that conclusion." So I think that fallibility could be something we benefit from, but it's also something we need to be careful of. And problem is that humans are very lazy quite often. Our brains don't want to spend all that cognitive energy that's limited. So we're very good at finding shortcuts when we do stuff. And the danger is that this is so convincing, these summaries, we're just going to say, oh, here's the conclusions that AI gave, make it look nice in a PowerPoint, and suddenly we've lost a lot of value. We've made some errors here and there. I think we need to really keep our standards, keep going beyond what the AI thinks is the answer, to find that more human answer, the one with empathy, the one with all that cultural, strategic understanding that we've got. So we need to get the most out of it, but yeah, not underestimate just the power it has, because it is pretty shocking how effective it can be in many ways, as much as it is flawed in some ways currently. But I think it's useful to have metaphors to kind of get our heads around this. There's the co-pilot, which Microsoft promoted, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It's the idea that it's an assistant. It's something that can help us do some of the heavy lifting of things that we don't want to do. But it still needs management. It still needs that leadership from us. So it's not replacing us. It's just making us more efficient. This is a really critical one. It ultimately, all it's doing is acting. All it's doing is based on, in the case of ChatGPT and OpenAI, which has learned all this internet data from a certain number of years. All it's doing is reducing all that internet data into a series of ones and noughts and numbers, and then predicting what the likely outcome is based on the prompt you're giving it. So it's really just acting like a human, because it's somehow mimicking the way that we organize information and we think. And so it doesn't know what it's saying. It doesn't feel anything. It doesn't really think anything. It's just a prediction engine that's pretty good at acting like a human quite often, and better at crunching vast amounts of data. So we need to remember that as well. And I think Formula One is a good metaphor as well, because that's about human and machine versus human and machine, and that's a more helpful way to think of this. It's not us versus AI, which is how everything's always the debate seems to be. It's us versus AI. Really, it's us and AI versus others and AI. So thinking about it as a support, as a way to make us better, is a useful metaphor as well, I think. But yeah, I'll go through the impact on planning, running projects, and analysis and reporting based on this survey. I'll go through it fairly quickly as well, and we can come back to all those questions. Do add in any questions, observations, thoughts, and then we'll just go through them and discuss them. So overall impact, to mix metaphors horrifically here, it's a double-edged sword of Damocles in many ways. It's kind of the elephant in the webinar really is like, is it going to replace us? It's most of the concerns that people had in this survey we did with Insight Platforms and sponsored by Qualsy. The cons are to do with it having less creativity, less critical thinking, less human interactions and insights, and the risk that it's going to devalue the role, damage reputation of qual if it makes these mistakes or doesn't do it as well. Pros people saw were around efficiency, inspiration, freeing up time for thinking, better access to research and democratization of research as well. So, it's a double-edged sword, but it is kind of hanging over us as well, because, things could change and our uniqueness, our scarcity value is definitely going to go down. So some people, it's just got some quotes from the discussion here saying, I'm just going to adapt with it. It's not going to replace us fully. It's going to make me stronger. Back then, experience was low. I'm sure this has changed. You can see 62% hadn't really used it, but optimism was quite high back then. I wonder if it's changed. We'll have to do a follow-up survey here. But 22% very optimistic, 37% quite optimistic. So maybe that's a sample bias because we attracted people to this initiative who are probably interested in innovation. So I don't know if that reflects the entire industry. But yeah, there's some optimism, yeah, as people do more and more, have more and more experience of this, I wonder how that changes. But this is where we asked them, where do you think Gen AI will have the biggest impact? And it was overwhelmingly on analysis, to a lesser extent on drafting guides, creating reports, generating hypotheses, and even lesser on planning, proposal writing, less on designing projects, and the joint least on moderating discussions. And that's probably the most contentious one. So a bit of a range of expectations there. When it comes to planning, yeah, around half expect a big impact on drafting discussion guides, generating hypotheses as well. So let's have a look into this extra bit of data we got, which was about, we asked people, people in marketing, design, product, so kind of in-house and other roles will end up doing more of their own qualitative research because of AI. How do you feel about that? And actually, most of our sample was agencies, practitioners. There was a few in-house teams as well, but there wasn't much difference between in-house teams versus agencies. Most people didn't really particularly like the idea of more in-house research. I think they see the value and they expect that value to continue of expert researchers doing the work, not trying to get lots of in-house people doing it, because I think there is a sense they're not going to do it as well. But why would they? They're not necessarily specialists in it. So you can see only 17% positive there, 27% neutral, and more on the negative and very negative side. Moving on to a couple of quotes here. So yeah, in terms of planning, the impact on saving time, helping develop hypotheses came up. And here was an in-house person saying, well, it's great if I can reduce the cost of research. It's great if more people in my team can do my research. And I think, it's hard, us as practitioners, it's very easy to forget that there is this growing, sometimes called DIY research, sometimes just, in-house research. That is going to keep growing, and AI is going to help that happen more. So we need to really think about that reality as well, and find our place in that landscape. So pros: inspiration, yeah, discussion guide ideas, desk research, input into hypotheses, efficiency, quicker writing of guides, creating materials to be tested, and then democratization. In-house teams can do more with less budget. But there's also, on the downside, risks. So a few quotes here from people that took part in this study saying, well, there's a risk to me as a researcher not getting the work. Also a risk that they won't have that nuanced human skill that we use if they're relying on AI or if non-experts are doing it. So there's an overall risk to the reputation perhaps of the industry there as well. Lack of creativity, AI is using learned data from the past, and it does churn out what often feels quite generic, if not a bit sensible, but it lacks that human touch, lacks that creativity. So what is going to happen? I don't know. Will qual be devalued if it's easier to get it done on a basic level for free, or not for free, but much less expensive, investment required. So on to the field work part of this. So yeah, moderating discussions were actually the least expected impact people were expecting. I mean, there were some pros on that debate. Can we automate probes? So someone here was saying, yeah, if it's good enough and I can't tell the difference, I think it's a great tool, particularly in communities. She personally didn't think that you need to disclose the fact that it's an AI chatbot that's moderating an online qual discussion. But equally thought if it's a sensitive topic, then it's probably respectful to mention it. So that's one perspective. I guess there's a question of quality. Will automated probes affect the quality of output, but also an ethical question of, are we obliged? Should we tell someone if it's a chatbot they're talking to, so they don't feel like they're sharing their soul to a computer? Is that misleading? Is it unfair? So yeah, efficiency gains, especially for lighter, simple probes like the welcomes, the thank yous. Perhaps that can be easily automated. And maybe there's even a benefit. Maybe if someone thinks they're speaking to AI, they don't feel judged. They're not going to posture as much. They're more likely to share taboos or things that they don't feel is socially acceptable if they're not speaking to a human. There is that researcher effect, so maybe it just reduces it. But obviously there's a flip side, there's negatives. It could be quite creepy. Participants might feel, a computer trying to ask them stuff, acting like a human. And on the flip side, some people think, you should communicate that. And also some concerns here about people adopting a robotic posture in response. So if you're being spoken to by a machine, you might end up talking like a machine. You're not going to bother sharing so much emotion. It's a bit like customer service. It can be quite annoying when you're speaking to a chatbot, especially if you don't really feel listened to. So that might negatively impact on the process. People might feel disengaged, less motivated. This is the flip side of the argument. I guess there's a lot of unknown here. We need studies to prove which way it goes. Maybe there's a difference between good AI and bad AI. I don't know. But yeah, two sides to that story. Will automated probing help or hinder us? Either way, it would certainly keep us out of the process to some extent, unless we're choosing automated probe suggestions. But even then, it's less time that we're spending moderating and less control we have over the process. So yeah, the cons of AI moderation include disengagement, demotivating, losing rapport, lacking that reciprocity between moderator and participant, people trying to game or sabotage the chatbot. I'm sure we've all done it. Insensitivity, the lack of nuance culturally, strategically, empathetically, offending someone. It might be inappropriate if someone's vulnerable and the AI says something upsetting, disrespectful. Erroneous probes, superficial probes, and just that distance between researcher and data. This is a really big one. I did a study the other day where I was moderating some depths. Then I used AI to analyze it. And I looked at the AI conclusions and just felt, okay, yeah, that's kind of good. But having done all of those interviews, I already knew a lot more about the emotional, contextual insights. And I felt like the AI tool was useful to get to quotes quickly, because I could then quickly search and it would tell me, who said what quickly. So there was an efficiency gain there, but I certainly didn't feel like it told me something I didn't know, because I'd sat through, 10 hours of interviews. So I had, it was more about efficiency, finding content rather than telling me conclusions, because I had that proximity to the data. I did all the moderation. If AI means that suddenly we're not doing the moderation, there's a huge distance there between the research and the data. You need to hear someone say something or read it to have that emotional reaction yourself, to work out what matters. AI can't have that emotional reaction when it processes information. It doesn't have emotions yet, or ever, perhaps, who knows. And then also fake participants. If people are using chat GPT or other tools to create responses quickly, then they're going to make a bit of money by doing very little, and we're going to end up with very generic responses answers. So yeah, overall, across the sample of these 164 researchers, it was quite negative, really. You've only got 15% positive, less than that, very positive, and you've got a 55, well, more than that. You can see it there, 25% neutral, 56 either very negative or quite negative. So this is an area that's quite contentious. I think this is where emotionally we feel a bit like, this is what I've spent years learning how to do. This is the bit, surely it can't replace us. Surely it can't factor in client politics, strategy, the emotions of people, the dynamics in the room. This is complex stuff that feels like it's hard to replicate as well as we do. But there are tools out there doing it. So we'll see. Even if participants believe the AI probes are from a human, this is a question here of like, does it matter if participants can't distinguish between human and AI moderators? Again, it's kind of negative. This is where there's almost an ethical question of, are we obliged to tell people if it's AI that they're speaking to or not? And it's quite polarizing. We had a fair few people saying, no, why would it matter? And others were saying, surely we should. And instinctively, I personally feel like you should say to someone, if you're expecting them to open up and talk to you, they should know if you're real or not at the very least. But yeah, room for interpretation there. The idea of AI probes being suggested by AI, this is a much softer area where people are much more positive. So instead of AI doing the probe, AI says, here's some probes you might want to do in the context of, say, text-based asynchronous online qual. This is a lot more positive. People are much softer about this, and platforms like Qualsy do this. They say, want to pick some of these suggested probes, you can edit them and then send them off. It might save you a bit of time. So that's another level of this to consider. Okay, so last couple of sections. So on to analysis and reporting. This is where, as I said, most people see the biggest impact in analysis and reporting. If it can do thorough, detailed, and sensitive analysis, it's going to save a lot of time. If it can help synthesize insights, that's helpful. That's really valuable. This is where we said, AI will reduce the time that researchers spend on content analysis. How do you feel about it? Again, very positive, 80% positive or very positive. The idea that it can automatically transcribe interviews and focus groups, I'm sure we're all using tools like that. Again, very positive. The idea that it will summarize text from qual research, still pretty positive. So all of these time savings is appreciated, but should that be at the expense of the human analysis we're doing, where we're making sense of it? Obviously not. I mean, certainly from my point of view. So the pros: more efficiency, less time to process content. I think video is where it really kicks in as well, because that is very time consuming, and it does do pretty good transcripts and pretty efficient ways to get to the most relevant bits of content when it comes to video. And Qualsy has some good tools on that as well. And smart searches by topic or hypothesis, easy to find verbatim. That's how I personally found it to be most useful so far in analysis. Faster conscription, I think that's a bit of a no-brainer. Managing larger qual samples, big question here. Suddenly you can do qual at scale. Do you necessarily want to? Isn't the point of qual that you speak to a small number of people who are well recruited, represent a larger sample, and you go in great depth? For me, that's what qual is about. Qual at scale, I'm sure there's a value for it, but it's not kind of the same benefit as qual, because you're not getting that level of depth and nuance and relationship with the person you're probing. But again, it's there is a big model out there of that, and it is going to be a growing area of research, surely, because procurement at the very least loves seeing lots of numbers of people in the study, and there's a sense of cost per head being the ultimate metric quite often, I think. So there's no doubt that's going to keep going. Semi-automated reports, and then more time free for thinking and reporting, which I think to me is another big benefit of this, if we can get efficiencies. Also insights that maybe we didn't see, like we do have our biases, obviously, we're human, we might miss things, it might not miss them, then we can stretch our thinking that way, and maybe it will give us some ideas for client recommendations too. Most of the ones I've seen so far seem to be quite generic by default, but there is this whole area of prompt engineering in ways that is really creative. I saw one strategist doing training on it where he said, yeah, I get the prompt engineer to do the tone of voice of my favorite comedian in a very particular constrained scenario, and then it starts to churn out quite creative things because you're setting constraints creatively. So there's this big rise of the AI whisperer, as they sometimes call it. We can get it to be quite creative if we prompt it in the right way. Yeah, the negatives. So ethical questions, the biases in the data. Remember, it's learned data from the internet historically. The internet, like humans, is full of prejudice, full of bias. There's lots of, everything, gender, race, whatever you can imagine, probably market researchers as well. There's lots of biases in there. So that's what it's got to work with. So clearly that's going to leak through to the way it makes sense of information. Um, there's hallucinations. It makes stuff up sometimes. Maybe that will get better. I don't know. But if we take stuff at face value without critically questioning it, if we take those shortcuts, there is certainly a risk in there. Um, and the better it gets, almost the bigger that risk is if we just assume it's always right. So there's issues here. There's invalidity, mistakes, gaps, inventions, biases, illusions of competency where we just trust it by default. Unoriginality, defaulting to expected thinking, less critical thinking and rigor. And then some experts have been talking about the role of researcher as the gatekeeper. We're the ones that instinctively know if something's right or not. So it's our job to take responsibility, to see what the AI tells us, but maybe to go back in and scrutinize it or to do our own primary research to check it. So there's this idea of an emerging role as gatekeeper as well that might address some of these things. But yeah, it can't synthesize and join the dots like we do. It can't deal with imperfection as well as we do. So that's again where we're presumably still pretty at an advantage. Lack of nuance, intuition, empathy, reading subtle nonverbal cues, cultural, client, political context, all those conversations we have in the back room that often shape the direction of projects. It's going to be harder for it to factor those in. And of course, data security, depending on where you're sharing or who's sharing what. A lot of this data is going back into in the case of ChatGPT, it's going back to OpenAI. So they're learning from all the data if you're using that to analyze. Is that ethical? Have people signed up to that? So on to conclusions, last bit, and then we'll have a discussion. I can't see the chat, but hopefully people have shared some questions, observations, ideas, and we can go through all that. Conclusions. I mean, for me, we have to explore our own boundaries. We may have our own different boundaries of where we feel like AI can add value, or how much we want to embrace it. We don't have to embrace it, obviously, but it's worth exploring. It's worth playing with tools, seeing where we end up, working out our own path. There is this sense of the sorcerer's apprentice in all this, I think. This is a quote from a really good book called The Alignment Problem, where Brian Christian looks at the error really and the flaws in AI, because AI is always designed against some kind of a purpose that humans set. And if that purpose is misaligned with actually what happens, then you can get in trouble. We could be like the sorcerer's apprentice, conjuring up a force that's autonomous but compliant, but we give it a set of instructions and then just try like mad to kind of, as it starts to unravel, and as we realize that what we said was ambiguous because we're not perfect, we end up in this difficult place. So it feels kind of paradoxical to me. I've been sent from the future to kill you. Also, you have a dentist appointment tomorrow. It's like we hate technology, but we love it. It helps us, it solves problems, but then it also dehumanizes our world, and we end up reliant on it, over reliant on it, and then resentful of it when it's not right. It's a strange relationship. The paradox for me is like we want AI to get better, to help us more and more, but equally we don't want it to get too good that it replaces us. So how do we resolve that paradox? This is probably the core question, I think, for certainly qual researchers. It's like, well, is it just going to keep on getting better than us and then replace us? We keep feeding it, using it, it gets better and better. Where does that leave us? I mean, logically, if it's getting better but we're getting better at the same time, it won't catch us. If we keep on improving by using AI, then we can maintain an advantage, and we can keep on adding value. And to do that, to keep on improving by using AI, it means using it for what it does better than us. Like, I mean, if it can transcribe video instantly and then you can suddenly get to particular snippets of long video, on an asynchronous online qual project, for example, that's saving us hours. Why wouldn't we want to use it for that? That makes sense. So using it for what it does better than us, checking it does it well enough, because for those out there that are trying to do low fee AI led projects, they're going to be riddled with mistakes eventually, or at least superficiality, because AI just doesn't have that nuance that we have, the empathy, the strategic knowledge, joining the dots, all those things. So for us, if we're using it, we can't be lazy. We can't just think, oh yeah, that looks pretty good, let's leave it there. We have to keep going back in and adding extra value, showing the value of human thinking, to pull in culture, to pull in context, to show our empathy, show our curiosity. AI doesn't do curiosity. It's one of its biggest weaknesses. That's the very core of a qual researcher. We hear someone say something, we intuitively think, that's interesting. I don't know why, but I'm just going to probe it. It's learned over years quite often. It's a strategic act to say, tell me more about that thing, which I don't know why, but I feel it's interesting. That's curiosity. That's what it doesn't do as well. So we have to really kind of double down on that skill, get extra value from what we're hearing people say, and then any efficiencies, we can reinvest that time to do things better. Like the last project I did, I actually did a video edit, a very basic video summary, which normally I'd say, I'm going to charge you for this. On this occasion, it didn't take that much longer to just do a basic video, because I had the means to get to the quotes more quickly. And actually some of the video software now is much easier to use. So there's ways to improve our outputs by reinvesting the time we save, or even just saying to clients, look, let's do a workshop of the results. Let's do a 3-hour, 2-hour meeting afterwards, where we will design a workshop and run it for you. So you're still getting paid, but you're maybe, because you freed up a bit of time over here, because you've got auto transcripts or whatever it was, you reinvest it over here, and you remain critical to researchers, and you move upstream as well. The more we are making recommendations, not just saying, oh yeah, qual research is reporting what people said. It's not really. Good qual is interpreting what it means, knowing what to ignore from what people said, knowing what to listen to, and making ourselves indispensable by being strategic and making recommendations. And that's where I think we will still be better than an AI-led solution will be. Yeah, remember, it doesn't yet have what we do in all those things. It doesn't have the curiosity, it doesn't have the humility, it doesn't have the empathy, and we need to keep using that and making that our competitive advantage. I asked ChatGPT what human qualitative researchers are better at, and it said understanding context, flexibility and adaptability, creativity and innovation. It's not very good at foreseeing the future. All its learning data is in the past. So us being able to spot unmet needs that are new emerging needs, that's a big area that it's not going to be as good at, because it hasn't learned the future, because it's all rooted in the past. Intuition, emotional intelligence, ethical judgments, all these areas it thinks we're better at, and hopefully it's right. Becoming an AI whisperer, some platforms make it easy to interact with AI analysis tools, for example, but I'm sure the more we play with it, the more we realize that there's our brain, our ability to ask questions of the data, as you might a junior who's done the research. You might ask them questions that get you to a strategic answer. Us doing that through AI tools, that's going to be a great skill for us to get more value from it, and prove our worth, prove that our skills, we are still the best people to do this AI whispering, because we know how to ask strategic questions of data. We know how to get to the emotion. That could be another important new skill. And either way, as they say, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. We should be learning how to do this. It is changing fast. We can't just assume it's not going to affect us, or hope it's not going to affect us. I think we need to work out our own boundaries in all this, and work out how it can help us or not. And finally, cyborg chess is when Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, the AI in 1997, the AI chess program. Rather than, I don't know, cry, though I'm sure he did, he created a new form of chess, which is cyborg chess, where it's human and machine, human and AI machine versus another human and AI machine. And it's not just a person playing a person, it's a person using the technology, seeing what they're going to accept from the recommendations and what they're going to reject. So still having an imprint on the game, but playing a super level of chess that's beyond human, and playing against someone else doing exactly the same thing. And if lots of qual researchers are using AI, it's a bit like that, really. It's kind of, who can use the AI best, and who can still do the best research in order to hopefully, keep working successfully. So again, just a final comparison to compare and think about. And then let's discuss all this. I'll switch off the presentation. Let's see what questions there are, what topics there are, and let's just have a thought, share experiences as well. If anyone's used the tools, it'd be great to know how useful you found them, what the shortcomings were. I think overall, hopefully we come out of that conversation with a better sense of what it is that humans do better and best, and where we add our value and where we can really retain that's importance and relevance in a world where AI is certainly not going away. And that is another AI picture, by the way, in case you're interested. Okay, so I will now end slideshow and hopefully
You
stop
should be able to
sharing.
again. Yeah. That was great. Thanks very much, Tom. Quite worrying, but maybe I shouldn't be worried by it. There were lots and lots of comments in the chat as you went along, and some people clearly have got some experience of using it. I don't know if people want to switch on their webcams and have a proper discussion now. We've got about half an hour left, so if you want to ask any questions directly of Tom, then please do. If not, I just have one question. Did I understand it correctly from the beginning, Tom, that you had some people within your sample who had used artificial intelligence in their research and some who hadn't?
Yeah, I think it was about 30% had used a tool at some point and the rest hadn't.
Did you see any notable differences between those that had and those that hadn't in terms of their attitudes towards it? Were they very positive about their experiences or mixed?
Not really. We didn't really do that analysis, so not sure. But generally, everyone was quite optimistic, so I think that probably would have covered both groups. There was a general sense of optimism, but they did all sign up to a AI workshop, so maybe they're all, pro innovation and a bit not representative of the whole industry. But yeah, kind of hard to say on that one.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions, anyone? No. Otherwise, we'll go through the chats.
Yeah, maybe just go for it if you've got one. Simon,
Yeah.
I think his hand up there.
Sorry, just one of the things I put in the chat was just on a very practical level. I'm quite interested in its use for analysis, maybe not doing all the analysis, but for time saving. What tools are good broadly for that? What specific software?
Yeah, I've been using Gen AI is the name of the company. I think the tool is actually called something else, but I'm sure someone knows them because I think the ICG did a bit of a thing with them. So they've got quite a good tool where you can put the transcripts in or even the raw data from asynchronous online qual. But yeah, if it's transcripts, you can almost segment it and say this transcript is from this segment, so it keeps track of that, and then you can do queries on the data and say, tell me about whatever it is, and then it will draw up conclusions, but also have references to the people that said what. So you can literally cut and paste verbatim as well, and it's all organized by, in my case, it was depth, so by person. So I could kind of read along. I could have, on one level it's got the question you ask for the data, and then below it's got the people, and you can just see quotes that match to it, which is 70% accurate, but gets you to stuff quicker. Loop, I'll check what they're called, but yeah, the company's Gen AI, I believe. Qualsy also have a tool integrated into their online qual platform where you can quite quickly see a summary of what was said in a given quote. You can search via the word cloud that's automatically generated, and you can edit in videos quite quickly. You can click on a theme that it automatically generates and then go to that part of the video quite quickly. So it's a quicker way of managing video content.
Simon, I think you also had a question about use of ChatGPT-4.
Yeah, it was just, so I've been fiddling around. I haven't paid for any of this yet. So although I do use Otter AI a lot for transcripts and things, but I've been sort of trying out ChatGPT-3, which I know is the old version. Basically trying to catch it out, which I've been doing left, right, and center. And it's not very difficult. But I'm interested in anybody who's used ChatGPT-4, which I think you have to pay for, and everybody says it's much better, but I'd just be interested in people's experiences.
Yeah, sorry, if someone else wants to also add, just very, very quickly, that's been a lot of these tools will integrate the latest. I don't know if it's Coloop, by the way, is the name of the company I was thinking of, that's run by Gen AI, Coloop. So I think they're still using ChatGPT-3, but I know that like Qual's has got ChatGPT-4 working into it. So a lot of these tools have that at the back end, but then they've got like I think they call it a sandpit. So data you put into it isn't sent off to OpenAI, and yeah, they've got ChatGPT-4 in it, I believe. So depends what tool you're using.
So Liz had a question, and it's certainly something that would concern me a little bit. She says the findings are interesting, but perhaps surprised at the balance of findings to the analysis and not the setup. Do we want to share confidential information with the world in order to use some of these tools? And I would have concerns about confidentiality as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends what tool you're using. So if you're going to ChatGPT and chucking a load of data into it, then yes, you're sharing it back with OpenAI, the company behind it, and yes, it will learn from that. If you're using this sandbox thing, which is where a company creates a kind of wrapper around that, and it's enclosed, so they're using that technology at the back end, but it's all enclosed within their platform, so you're not sharing it with the world, or you're not sharing it with OpenAI. So that's why, yeah, paying for a tool that gives you that security is probably a good shout to avoid that issue. But yeah, in terms of the before and after bit, I mean, for me, a bigger challenge coming up with a design for research is kind of feels relatively easy to me. Analyzing vast swathes of data is just very, very time consuming and use up a lot of mental energy. So I think for me, I do see a bigger role at the back end of analysis rather than at the front end of design. But I guess everyone's different. Everyone's brains prefers different things. So maybe people might find setup a bigger challenge and want more support there. But yeah, that would be my take. But if anyone else wants to answer any of these questions as well, jump in. I don't want to.
So there's another. Oh, sorry, who was going to speak then? Nope. So there's another question. Any recommendations for AI qualitative analysis tools for other languages than English?
Not that I know of. I mean, even Coloop, which is the one I referenced at the beginning, who I really, got value out of using, they're still in beta, really. They haven't fully, it's still a very new area. I think there's some, I've not used them, but there are those classic like discourse analysis tools. I'm struggling to remember the name of them. Is it NVIDIA, or am I making that up? Yeah, there's a few out there that do offer it, but I don't know. Go onto Insight platforms; they've got loads of really good directory of tools. Mike Stevens' Insight platforms you'll find quite a few there.
There's another comment about using AI for transcripts, saying that I have used AI for transcripts before, but had to human correct them. That's my experience as well when I've used things like Otter. Any thoughts on that, and how fast they're evolving to become more efficient?
Yeah, only anecdotally, I've heard some. In fact, the guys at Coloop were saying that the tools they're using is unbelievable, and way better than Otter. I've also experienced mistakes, here and there. I think it depends how you're using it. If you've done the moderation and you're using it to kind of remind yourself at the very least of what was said, maybe it's good enough if they got the odd word wrong. If you're using it to present a project that you haven't moderated, and if that's the only data you've got, then it's going to be more of an issue. But I guess it depends what model you're in. But I think that's going to probably get better and better all the time, would be my estimate.
Which tool did you say was miles better than Otter?
No, it's just an anecdote. I can't remember the name of it, but it was mentioned by, actually, it's Qualsy who was saying they're using this new tool to integrate to their platform, which is, yeah, way better, apparently. But so I think this question there.
Graham.
Sorry, this is.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. I think just one of the first things you said, Tom, was about that we tend to be quite sort of modest souls, and we need to remind people, well, even remind them, I think inform them of where we add the value. And one of the things that really concerned me was seeing that 90% of people felt that the biggest impact that AI would have was in analysis. Because to me, other than moderation, actually, whether it's online or face-to-face, other moderation, the biggest human impact, from my perspective, comes from the analysis process. Now, that might be partially because the work I do is development research, so it's always looking forward. Now, AI, of course, it's intrinsically retrospective. So part of the process of analysis, and I think the particularly human thing, is that I see it as a dynamic process. It's an iterative process. New ideas occur to you as you're doing it, and you could then test hypotheses live. You look for connections. All kinds of different ideas are occurring to you as you get. I've always compared it to peeling the layers of an onion. You can't see what's next until you've actually got that far. You've got the first couple of layers off, then you see, and then it can take you a completely different place. And that feels to me like an intrinsically human process. But of course, the thing about analysis is it's the black box of qualitative research. It's the bit that clients don't see. And I just wonder if you have any perspectives on whether and how we can alert people, clients more effectively, to the fact that there's this incredibly important hidden added value in that inside that black box, and that's where the real human value is added.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think as you were saying that, I was trying to think like, what's the metaphor for this? And it's almost like, a wine or an olive oil that's been hand pressed using the wood of oak barrels, whatever it is. There's a story that you, as you drink that wine, you want to buy into that story. You want to buy into that craftsmanship. And I wonder if there's a thing there for research. It's like, the story of the analysis almost, I went through this, I saw this is why I really wanted to dig into it. That's why I asked this probe, and look what they said. They revealed a contradiction, and that's so interesting. Or look at the vulnerability here, look how anxious they are, and that made me think it's almost telling the story of the analysis, perhaps, so that people are like, oh my god, that's really insightful. Because researchers are pretty humble. I mean, if it's possible to brag about being humble, there's so much that we do that we just don't even tell clients. Like we do a probe, it's like there's so much thought, it's like all these different factors. They don't know that. They just think we're asking questions. That's why so often people go in-house and they try and do a focus group and they can't do it because it's bloody hard. You've got so many competing things to think about. If we need to get credit for that, and on the analysis point, I think maybe I almost feel like sometimes we just go straight to the answers and say, here's the answers, trust us. Oh, and here's a couple of quotes to prove that we did the work. Whereas maybe it's more like, look at this quote, look at the probe I did, putting probes into our reports. This is what I found. This is why I asked that probe, educating them on the journey we are working out, sharing our working out, and making that part of the story.
I am wondering whether we need to show our workings a bit more, which I've always been very resistant to doing, but I'm beginning to think we might need to start doing that.
But look at marketing. I mean, it's a marketing problem, isn't it? It's how do we market our value? Look at how cars market the value. They say, oh, we've got this amazing new system here. I mean, yes, it's benefit led, but the benefit will be the proof of whether what we tell them helps them. Really, there's a benefit in reassurance. There's a benefit in thinking this person really thought this through and knows what they're doing. Not, oh yeah, we got these surveys, it churned it out. We think it's probably the right answer, but hopefully it is. So yeah, maybe I think it's PRing ourselves and being clear on our craft and what we're great at, and making sure clients appreciate that. And like in car advertising, whatever advertising is showing the process and making a hero of it, revering it a bit more.
Any other questions, anyone? I just have another question. Is there any risk or any danger that this will devalue and reduce the quality of the research that we're producing by some people within the industry using this to cut corners and potentially producing AI-produced reports or analysis that hasn't had the strategic thinking behind it? Is there this danger there that could happen?
Yes, but I'd add to that and say, you're talking about our industry of qual researchers. Like, who is that? Are they the qual researchers like us that have been classically trained, that have spent years doing groups, done however many hours of groups to refine this? Or are we talking about people doing what might be called qual research, who don't have any of that background, who are in-house, who are in the long tail of companies out there? The biggest impact is probably going to be on that long tail of companies that couldn't afford research before, as opposed to the big corporates who always can and do. And use us. What about this long tail of companies that couldn't do research before? It's being democratized like every other thing, like web design, everything else. There's no hiding from the fact that more and more companies that aren't trained in research can now at least do something that looks a bit like qual. But yes, they're going to be making loads of mistakes and lacking the quality. And yes, I think qual research could be in danger in that respect. But then going back to web design, yes, there's loads of self-service platforms out there, but if you really want to do it well, you're going to go to a pro who's going to do it better. because they're going to know the latest and make it more reliable than the rest of it. So we're going to coexist alongside this long tail of DIY researchers and in-house researchers, and it might nibble at our margins unless we can prove our value and still be, significantly better than what they're doing or what a DIY person would do. So yeah, I think we need to make sure that best practice is well publicized. How we present stimulus, how we interpret stuff, how we design a sample. If we need to keep that front and center so people can at least be educated enough to challenge a DIY researcher saying, yeah, but who's your sample? Oh, they're all customers that love you already. Well, what about prospective customers? Or, are you asked that question, but you didn't rotate the stimulus? Whatever it is that keeps us having quality and confidence, we need to publicize this, make sure everyone knows what best practice is. So at least we get credit for it. And there is this sense of oh, there's a really good way of doing this, is one response, I guess.
Okay, any other comments or questions, anyone? Yep, Andrew.
Thanks, Tom. That was really good. I think it starts to get, for someone who does qual and quant, I think it starts to get interesting when we start to combine those two worlds. I have so many examples of clients spouting incorrect, inconsistent market stats back. So in the quant world, primary data is still king. But when we start to, especially at the analysis stage, when we start to be able to pull the qual and the quant together to create combined outputs through AI, ChatGPT, I think that's where it starts to get really interesting for me. Just a comment.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, on that point, this is where I think, in some of the conversations I've had on LinkedIn, there's some really impressive stuff that Inca are doing, where they're doing a lot of that. I think it's Phil Sutcliffe made a great point about, this is going to introduce new ways of doing stuff, which qual at scale is, a relatively new way. If suddenly you can get lots and lots of responses. And I think it goes back to that procurement mindset of, oh, I've got this cost per head and I've got loads of people, I can be confident in the results. But for me, the great thing about qual is actually great depth with small people being representative and hoping that extrapolates because they're the right people you've picked. And I think another thing, Kathy Chen, who's also part of that group, she made a great distinction between light qual and deep qual, where she says, yes, light qual, there's a lot that can be automated, maybe the probing, maybe the analysis, because it's basic stuff like, where did you go to shop? I don't know, more like behavioral quantity stuff, perhaps. Then there's deep qual, which is where you're weaving in culture, unconscious feelings, dealing with the contradictions at the heart of humanity, all of this context, empathy, nuance, doing that with great curiosity. That's where deep qual is happening. That's where you're going to need the human, because AI, by definition, if it's based on past data, it can't. Yes, it's a convincing actor, but it's not a human, and it's going to take years. I don't think it's going to be a human in our lifetime. If you read what people say about replicating the brain, it will do stuff that looks very, very human, very, very convincingly. But we're pretty complex, millions of years of evolution, versus 50 years of computer scientists trying to replicate a human brain. They're not there yet, even though they look like they're incredibly close. So yeah, deep qual, I guess, is what would be my thing to champion in that way.
To what extent are you using it at the moment, Tom, and what do you use it for?
I'm mainly using it the managing, finding quotes, to be honest, because if I'm doing all the moderation, I've got what I think are the answers because I've spent hours doing it. My brain's ticking over and I'm writing thoughts down and I'm keeping track of the story. So by the time I've done all the field work, I've pretty much done most of the analysis, and then I kind of tend to try and write down the story, and then I'll try and find some quotes to back that up, and that's where I use an AI tool, like the CoLoop one, where I'm just like, what quotes, what verbatim are there to do with people not trusting the company, because I knew there was something in that story that I wanted to substantiate, and then it finds me a few quotes. Not all of them are right, but a couple are, and then I found my quote, might go back to that transcript and then look at it in context. But that's quicker than what I would normally do, which would be go through the transcripts and pull out the quotes laboriously, and then you get stuck in the task and you're probably spending more time than you need to. So for me, it's the efficiency of finding stuff that I already knew existed, not tell me something I didn't know or do my job for me. It's just to kind of find the needle in the haystack, but I know the needle's there already because I heard them say it. So the risk is when you've got teams who aren't doing, this is where independents are well placed because we're doing the moderation largely. If you've got a team of people where the junior person's doing the moderation, maybe there's multiple moderators, then the AI is doing the analysis, there's a big disconnect because I think as Graham was saying, it's when you're in the field and you're feeling what people are saying, you're reacting, that's when your brain's ticking over and working out what's important. If you're not in the field doing that, you're just relying on what AI thinks is important, which is based on a probability, not a humanity, an instinct. So being in the field is a big selling point, I would say, and that is why I use AI more to analyze, because I wouldn't want AI to do my questions for me at all. And it's a small sample; it doesn't take that long to moderate, really, compared to analyze for me.
Okay, any more questions, anyone? No? Right, well, Tom, thanks very much indeed for that. It's been really interesting and some great questions and discussion. Lots of feedback in the chat, by the way. Otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us today. Do log in for one of our future webinars. And otherwise, have a fantastic afternoon, everyone. Bye all.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.